Yo, what's going on, guys? It is Nick here, back again with a brand new video today. We're going to be continuing my series in which I review every single Marvel Cinematic Universe film up to release of Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania. Today, we're actually going to be reviewing the predecessor to Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania, Ant-Man and the Wasp, which is the 8th film in Phase 3. So Ant-Man and the Wasp is once again directed by Peyton Reed and has very much of our returning cast I'm going to go through individually. First off, Paul Rudd is excellent. Once again, as Scott Lang as Ant-Man. I love the guy in this role. And this is our third time seeing him in this role because we saw him in the first Ant-Man and in Captain America Civil War. And I feel like in this movie, it just proves to you how perfect the casting was for Ant-Man. I just don't think they could have picked anyone better than Paul Rudd. He's charming, he's funny, he's sympathetic, but he's also kind of a guy who makes a lot of mistakes. But, you know, he's got a lot of redeeming qualities to him. I just think Paul Rudd plays him so well. As well as Evangeline Lilly, who has given a lot more to do this time as Hope Pym, as she is now the Wasp. If you guys saw the first Ant-Man, you guys know that the post-credit scene for that movie was her seeing the Wasp suit. And she actually has a lot more to do this time, which I like. I mean, she was good in the first one, but they just give her more to do this time. And I kind of appreciate that. And it was cool to see this character become the Wasp. And actually, I really like the duo dynamic between Ant-Man and the Wasp. You know, hence the reason that's the title of the movie. But I just think it's a really good duo they got going on there. I think it's cool how instead of just calling it Ant-Man 2, I like how they called it Ant-Man and the Wasp, showing that there's a lot more of a duo, like, team superhero movie. Instead of just having a lead as Ant-Man, they have two leads as Ant-Man and the Wasp. I think the two of them make a pretty good duo, and I also think the chemistry between the two of them is really good. Of course, gotta give credit to Michael Douglas again, who gives another great performance as Hank Pym. He was great in the first movie, and he's just as great in this one, and I think Michael Douglas does a great job at playing a caring father, a loving husband, and a just mentor to Scott Lang. And I just think that Michael Douglas plays the character so well, and he really does make the family that goes on in this franchise feel like a real family, and I can't give Michael Douglas enough credit for his acting in the role. We have much better villains this time around, in my personal opinion, with Hannah John Kamen as Ghost and Lawrence Fishburne as Bill Foster. The villain in the first one, I forget his name, but he ultimately became Yellow Jacket, and he was a cool villain, but I kind of just felt like the build-up to him was kind of weak, and so even though we got a really good final fight out of Yellow Jacket, I didn't really feel like it meant a whole lot. This one, I found the villains to be a lot more memorable. I found them to be a lot more compelling than that one. So I think that's really one way in which Ant-Man and the Wasp kind of improved over the first Ant-Man. And so I appreciate the fact that this time they kind of like learned from that and like went out of their way to make a better villain, in my personal opinion. Of course, Michael Pena proves once again that he's a great sidekick as Luis. He's funny. He adds more comic relief to the kind of situation going on, which is fun, and he's great with Paul Rudd. And this doesn't really have anything to do with the movie, but a personal anecdote: the actress who plays his grandmother in the flashback is actually an actress from my town. I just think that's pretty cool, but that's beside the point. I just wanted to say that. I thought it was a cool little anecdote. But yeah, Michael Pena is a great sidekick as Luis, and we also still have a lot of fun with David Dastmalchian and T.I. as Kurt and Dave. All three of those guys make a really fun kind of just like duo on the side with Ant-Man. They add a lot of comic relief, and of course Michael Pena is a standout of all of them, but I just think they all add a lot of fun to the movie. And even though I already talked about the main villains, we also have a very interesting side villain named Sonny Birch, played by Walton Goggins. Now, we don't see him too much in the movie, but the scenes that he's in, Walton Goggins actually gives a really good performance. Everything I've seen that guy in, he's given a really good performance in, and this film is no exception. And he's kind of weird because he's more of kind of like a charming kind of villain. Like the villains that we see in who are the main villains are sympathetic, and this one he's not really sympathetic, but he has a certain kind of like douchebaggery kind of charm to him. I don't know, Walton Goggins I feel like pulls that off very well. And speaking of charming douchebags, we also have Randall Park as Jimmy Woo. Now, to be completely honest, Jimmy Woo becomes more interesting down the line in future Marvel projects that I won't go into in this review. But I don't know, Randall Park has this kind of like weird, like deceitful charm to him when he does Jimmy Woo that I just think he plays it very well. And I don't know, he can be a little bit much at times. He could be a little bit annoying, but I find him funny, so I don't know. The cast aside, though, which does a great job in this film all working together, I really love the family dynamic of this film. It's great, and what I kind of find interesting is that the family dynamic, it's like one narrative that's told across like 3 or 4 different stories, but even though like the stories are all going at the same time, the fact that they all have one narrative, I feel like is why this film feels a lot more balanced than maybe some other superhero movies that have a lot of stories like Spider-Man 3 or The Amazing Spider-Man 2 or Iron Man 2. I don't know, like this has a lot of stories, but because there's one narrative, it feels a lot more cohesive and balanced than a lot of those other movies, and I think that the narrative of this one about being about family, I think is really nice. I just love the family dynamic of this film a lot. I have a few of the dynamics listed here. We have the dynamic between Scott and his daughter Cassie, which I think is really sweet, and it's kind of interesting because you see how in the first movie, Scott Lang is this very smart criminal, but you do ultimately see that he wants to be a good father, and that's ultimately what you realize about him when he's under house arrest and all that stuff is that even though Scott Lang might break the law from time to time, he really is a good dad, and I really appreciate that aspect of the character. Also, like, the whole dynamic of the Pyms in this film is about them trying to get Hank Pym's wife back, who's also the mother of Hope. And I mean, even though, like, that's like, I know that's like the main, how do I say, that's the main focus of the story, and that's the main goal of the story, it adds interesting family dynamic that really shows that, like, family is everything. I think this film and that specific narrative in the film displays that very well. And like I said, I feel like the actors in this movie, especially between Michael Douglas and Evangeline Lilly, they feel like a real family there. And so I appreciate how the family dynamic is great, but the way that they go about the family dynamic in this movie is why I think Ant-Man and the Wasp is a great Marvel movie. And then also Ghost's motives, who's the villain of our story. Her motive is also family-based, which is very interesting. I know like there's a huge narrative about family in this movie. I can't believe I'm saying the word family so much. I feel like I'm talking about Fast and Furious. But I like the fact that it's like told across different stories and different conflicts that goes on between family. And I like the fact that it goes about it in a way that doesn't feel necessarily so black and white, in a way that feels very much like a gray area kind of. And I feel just the way they go about it is very well done. Yeah, as I said, I feel like this story does balance the different stories very well due to the consistent themes. But there's also a lot of great humor all around in this very easygoing movie. The first Ant-Man movie is also very easygoing. And I feel like this one is like just as easygoing. In fact, it might be a little bit more fun and lighthearted than the first one to a certain degree because of how like heartwarming the story narrative is. But I don't know. I feel like the humor that they put in the story works very well with the movie. It's witty, it's funny. I feel like I was watching the film last night and like all the jokes made me laugh, and I felt like basically every single joke landed. I don't know. These characters are a lot of fun, and you have a lot of fun seeing them work together on camera. The actors and the chemistry is great, and they all feel like real friends and real family. You gotta give them credit for that. And of course, I gotta talk about the action sequences in Ant-Man. I'm not gonna go into specifics, but seeing the different scales of action sequences, whether it's like when Ant-Man's huge or when he's small, or when they're, you know, normal size, or when they're like in between all those phases. Like, you do get some comedy out of it, and it does show that action scenes can be funny, but they're entertaining action scenes, and the CGI for them is really good, and it's very, like, appealing to see. You get a lot of really cool, interesting spectacle out of all these action sequences. Now, this is a really good movie. I do have a few flaws with it, but nothing really that major. I put that even though I feel like the movie does balance the multiple stories pretty well, at times it can feel a little bit unbalanced, and like, just because of all the stories going on. So I feel like at times we're going between this story and that story and this story, even though the narrative is all the same, and I feel like the narrative is what balances it pretty well, the actual just balancing of the scenes can feel a little bit uneven at times. And I also put, although I love the family narrative of this film, it's not as strong as the narrative as the first movie. And I feel like the reason I say that is because, like, the first movie has a similar narrative, but with a little bit more going to it. But I feel like that because there's not so many stories going on at the same time, it's able to define the narrative a lot more strongly than the multiple stories defining one narrative in this film. That's kind of like another little issue I have with it, but nothing too major. And then something that doesn't personally bother me all too much, but that might bother a lot of people who really love the first Ant-Man movie, is that the movie is less so about Ant-Man, it's more so about the team that, like, we see at display with him, the Wasp, and Hank, and it's more so about the dynamic of our characters as opposed to just having one solo character and the side characters. It's like we got Ant-Man, we got Wasp, we got Hank Pym, and it's really more so about them as a team and less so about Ant-Man, but it's still a very good Ant-Man movie. And like I said, I think it was good that the title was Ant-Man and the Wasp, that way it doesn't mislead the people too much, because it is about these two characters and it's about the two of them together, not about the two of them apart or about Ant-Man more than the Wasp. So before I go into my rating and my grade, which I will get to in a second, I'm going to put a small section here where I'm going to go into spoilers for a second. The first spoiler is probably the most obvious, which is the mid-credit scene that takes place after Avengers Infinity War. So I actually kind of like the fact that this film is a nice counterbalance in terms of its tone to Avengers Infinity War, because that film is very gritty, and this one's a lot more lighthearted, so I appreciate that it came out when it did, and that it's a nice counterbalance in terms of its tone. But if you guys have seen the mid-credit scene for Ant-Man and the Wasp, you know that Ant-Man goes to the quantum realm to get some stuff for Ghost, and then Hope and Hank and Janet, that's her name, played by Michelle Pfeiffer, blip. I remember going and seeing that in theaters when I saw Ant-Man in the quantum realm. I was like, yeah, why are they not communicating? Then I saw them blip, and I was like, oh. So that's where that's going. And that's another really good thing about this movie. I like the fact that this movie explains why Ant-Man wasn't there in Infinity War. It's due to house arrest, but there's also a whole bunch of other stuff going on. And also, it's kind of scary to think about the fact that Ant-Man is stuck in the quantum realm as the blip happens. So it's like, how long is he going to be in there, you know? And that adds like a whole other level of tension to what could potentially come out in Avengers Endgame. And so, I don't know, man, but it adds a certain level of grit to the story that you previously didn't see throughout the whole entire movie. We had this very easygoing movie, very fun, lighthearted family, heartwarming stuff, and then we had this very gritty, just like, oh, I don't know what we're about to see kind of ending. And so, I don't know. It's like it. I mean, it's a great ending, but it's also kind of just like hypes you up a little bit, makes you a little bit worried for what they could do in Avengers Endgame. And another kind of spoiler thing that I'm talking about is I really like the scene between Michelle Pfeiffer as Janet and Ghost, who's the villain. It's like after they finally get her out, which again, I've already talked about how we're in spoiler territory. So if you're watching this, you've seen the movie. I liked how they were able to get Janet back in the realm and seeing her have the conversation with Ghost or have like that moment with her because she understands Ghost's pain. I don't know. I think it just adds more to the story. I like the fact that these heroes and villains could actually like kind of work together instead of just constantly going at each other. It's a nice little just mix there that I really like. But flaws aside and spoilers aside, we're going to go ahead and get into the rating. I'm going to give this movie an overall rating of an 8.8 out of 10. It's very entertaining. I like it slightly just a bit more than the first Ant-Man movie, which I know is an unpopular opinion, but that's just my opinion. And I'm going to give it an overall grade of an A-, which is actually the same grade I gave to Ant-Man. I know there's some people who don't like Ant-Man and the Wasp, and I've never been one of those people. That's like one of the big moments in the MCU fanbase where like I heavily disagree with the viewers. I have always loved Ant-Man and the Wasp. Sure, there's some aspects about it that maybe aren't perfect, and I can understand why maybe there's certain aspects of it that maybe people don't like, but I've always loved this movie, and I like it just a little bit more than the first Ant-Man, although I do feel like those two are somewhat interchangeable. But that's just my personal opinion, and I just wanted to be honest in this review. If you guys see my movie reviews, you know that I am honest all of the time. I never fake any of my stuff. Every time I tell you about a movie, I'm just honest there, which is what I encourage you guys to do. If you guys are going to watch Ant-Man and the Wasp, just be honest about it. Don't worry about what the people online are saying, or don't worry about how you feel like you have to feel a certain way. Just enjoy it for what it is, and be honest with your own opinion about it. So that was my review of Ant-Man and the Wasp. Make sure that you tune in to my channel just a few more days to watch my review of the next movie in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, Captain Marvel. Make sure you guys hit the like button, hit the subscribe, hit the notification bell so you get notified about my latest videos. Leave a comment down below letting me know what you thought. I can't wait for Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania. You guys know you're going to get a review when that comes out. So yeah, thank you guys for watching the review, and that's been it. Peace.